Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Process. I have been reflecting a lot this week about my words, the way that I am talking to myself when I am feeling stressed or overwhelmed or nervous. And I want to talk about my process for working through these moments and also areas where I am currently working on, where I am currently becoming more aware of where I actually am not treating myself with as much kindness or having as much self compassion as I want to. So, of course, my whole premise here, my whole mission is around the way that we speak to ourselves, the beliefs that we hold about ourselves that we aren't even aware are sitting under the surface. How can we become more aware of the way that we speak so that we can bring in more compassion for ourselves and then also start to make shifts to the way that we show up? Now, when I first started learning about all of these things, I really focused on the big key components of how I spoke to myself. And what I mean by that is, how am I saying my I am statements? Who am I telling myself that I am? My example of not being able to run and then changing that narrative and realizing, okay, by changing the story and saying I am a runner, I actually can run a lot further than I thought that I could. It wasn't my body that was stopping me from running, it was my mind. And I had a lot of these kind of big overarching stories that I was speaking to and that I was working on. But as I get deeper into this work, what I'm realizing is that, yes, those are so important. But I think equally important is getting really granular on what is being said in the everyday moments. How am I responding to minor inconveniences? What am I saying when I make a small mistake in a blip of a moment? What's happening there? Because a lot of these things, I think I was almost so stuck on the big picture. Not stuck on the big picture, but I was focusing my attention on the big picture that I wasn't spending as much time thinking about, even if I'm thinking about it up here on this higher level, there's all these tiny moments throughout the day where your subconscious wiring, which is the thoughts and the beliefs that you have that are sitting underneath the surface that you don't have conscious awareness of because they have been programmed in your body since you were probably a child, a teenager, but very early on, some early stage of your life. These thoughts don't often come to the forefront of our mind because it is habitual, it is instinctive, it is so automatic that we don't even stop to think about it. Now, I have in more recent times started to really notice these moments, not all the time, because of course this is a process, this is me working on it. But I had a couple of examples in the last couple of days that have stood out to me and that I thought I would speak to because this, I think, is where a lot of the change can happen. And I speak about this a lot actually from the lens of a speech pathologist when I'm working with families, where I say it's not about the 45 minutes a week or a fortnight where you come to see me and we work together and I do some work with your child. Yes, that can make a little bit of a difference. I can show them something new or I can show the parent something new. But the real change happens on that daily micro level in the little back and forth moments where there's an interaction between the child and the parent, and there's this beautiful opportunity for connection, whether that's working on language or whether they're working on a speech sound or reading or something like that. And I think the same applies to this whole concept of self-talk, where yes, you can focus on big picture moments, but if we're not thinking about those really small, like instantaneous thoughts that we have, we are missing a big part of the picture because those thoughts happen all the time. So let me give you an example. The other day I was making breakfast, and typically what I do is we'll have some sort of combination of, say, eggs, mushrooms, avocado, and then I like to put just some cracked pepper and seeds. So just a whole range of seeds, nuts, whatever we want on top of our breakfast. Now, normally I put I'm giving you so much detail because this shows how small of a moment this was. But normally I put everything on the plate and then I put the pepper and the seeds and everything on top. But this time I put all of it on top before I put the avocado on top. So then I didn't have seeds or pepper on my avocado. Now, this is such a tiny detail because of course I'm just going to mix up the whole bowl anyway. But what happened when I realized that I put the avocado on last? My immediate thought was, oh, of course I did that wrong. Of course I did that wrong. That came out of my mouth before I could even stop myself. Even though I think about this stuff all the time, even though learning about my language and helping women with their language is my absolute biggest passion ever. Even with that, my subconscious wiring, these limiting beliefs that I have about myself or have had throughout my whole life, that is still there. It is still underneath the surface. And it is a constant effort for me to notice these thoughts and to shift them. And in this moment, I hadn't had the best sleep. I was feeling a little bit run down, and the thought came straight out of my mouth before I even realized. Now, I did realize as soon as I said it. And so then I had an opportunity to correct myself. I also had my husband jump in and say, hey, you don't need to speak about it like that, you know? But right away, I also said, whoa, hang on a second. I'm not perfect. Breakfast doesn't need to be perfect in order to be delicious. The food is going to taste the same regardless of what order it goes onto the plate. And mistakes are okay. It's not a big deal. I said all of those things out loud because my daughter was also standing in front of me as all of this happened. So she saw my initial reaction. And for me, it is so important that I am actively modeling for myself, but also for her, how we work through these moments, because we're not going to get it right all the time. Like I said, I think about this stuff all the time. I notice it in other people. I notice the patterns. I have to stop myself from calling it out all the time. I have to keep my coach hat off some of the time when I'm not in a coaching session, because I notice these patterns all the time because it's something I think about, but it still happens. I am still having to consciously work on interrupting these patterns. And this will be for the rest of my life. But the point that I'm really trying to make here is that was a tiny moment. And I could have just glossed straight over it, or I could have gotten sucked into the spiral of, wow, you didn't do it perfect, and so now breakfast is ruined. And again, this is a minuscule example. This is something that probably other people wouldn't even bat an eye at. It wouldn't even be something for them. But for me, it is tied to this story that I had for myself for a very long time that I've mentioned in previous episodes, that is all around it needing to be perfect. It needs to be presented well. It needs to have the right flavors in all the right spots. Otherwise, it's not good enough. Now, I am becoming more and more and more aware of this pattern so that I can leave it behind and I can focus more on the effort. I can focus more on how I'm showing up. But this was a moment where I really had to slow down and intentionally model not just the correction, but also just my thought process of working through it. And I said all of that out loud, but after I corrected myself, I said, wow, that was really interesting that came up, and that was so instant for me to say that for such a small thing that really shouldn't matter. But that's the point, is that you might not even realize that it's happening. I don't know if the camera is shaking right now. It's because the washing machine is shaking. So if you are watching the YouTube version of this and the camera is shaking a little bit, I'm not going through an earthquake. I just have a washing machine, and we live in a house that's on stilts. So it kind of shakes the whole house. It's really, really fun. Anyway, so that happened a couple of days ago, and that was really interesting. Just that whole situation and how quickly these things can happen if you let your guard down. Now, the reason that this happens, diving into the science and the science behind what is actually happening in your body. We have our conscious mind, which is obviously when we're aware of the thoughts that we're having and we're being really intentional about what we're thinking. And then we have our unconscious mind or our subconscious mind, where it's all beneath the surface, like I mentioned before. Something that I learned recently was that our brains work in such a fascinating way that only 5% of the time we are in our conscious mind. So only 5% out of 100 are we making decisions from the conscious part of our mind, where we have the control and we can shift the way that we're thinking and we can be really intentional with the way that we're thinking. The other 95% is subconscious. That is all of the thoughts that are sitting there, that are going unnoticed, that are underneath the surface, that are taking our mind and our body in the direction that is pre-programmed for us to go. So I heard an analogy about this that I thought was really interesting, that I thought I would share here as well, where he talked about it like a magnet, where we have the direction that we want to go consciously. And 5% of the time we can take that magnet and we can shift it. We can move it into a different direction. Say, for example, if we're working on our self-talk and we want to be more positive and caring and compassionate towards ourselves, during that 5%, we can shift it and we can really push it in the direction that we want to go. But inevitably, we're going to come back to that 95%, and that subconscious mind is going to pull that magnet back to whatever direction is due north for us. That pre-programmed limiting belief, all of those negative thoughts, I mean, they're not all negative, but whatever you kind of have programmed into your mind, it will get pulled back in that direction. So it is a constant battle between what you can consciously do versus what your body is going to do. And that for me was such an interesting visual and such a powerful way to explain how crucial and fundamentally important it is for us to go deeper, for us to bring those subconscious thoughts into the conscious so that we can start to shift them, so that more of our subconscious is rooting for us in a positive way. We are changing and rewiring the pathways so that when we do fall back into those automatic patterns, we are setting ourselves up to have more of those positive, affirmative thoughts for ourselves instead of constantly getting pulled into the negative. Now, another example of where this came up for me was actually just this morning. And I can't remember if I've spoken about this on the podcast yet, but if I have, I'll do a quick refresher. And if you haven't listened to another episode, then this will be a great first introduction for you. But there is something in our brain called the reticular activating system, or the RAS for short, or RAS. And this is a bundle of nerves that sits in your brainstem, and it essentially acts as your brain's gatekeeper. It filters through all the information that we encounter on a daily basis, and it decides what information is relevant for us and what information is not relevant. It helps us to hear our name if we're in a busy room, say for like a safety reasons, or to look out for threats. It'll help us with that. But it also aligns us with the current beliefs that we have about ourselves, the current things that we focus on, which is where the saying comes from of what you focus on grows. Because your brain is wired to look for any sort of evidence that supports what you already believe about yourself. Or just in general, anything that you are thinking about, you're going to see more of. If you've bought a new car, and you're like, wow, this is such a beautiful car, you're probably going to start seeing that car everywhere. And it's not as though a whole bunch more of those cars suddenly appeared. It's that your RAS is actively looking for them because that is what you told it to focus on. So this applies to our language as well. This applies to our negative self-talk. If we are constantly saying negative things about ourselves, if we are constantly saying, oh my God, I always get this wrong, just like I did earlier, what I was talking about the other example, of course I did that wrong. If I'm saying that constantly, my brain is going to always be looking for more examples of where I have done things wrong. And to be honest, this was my pattern for most of my life. Also, just really quickly, if you can hear my daughter in the background, very upset, my apologies. That's life with a toddler for you. So, coming back to what I was talking about, if you are thinking these negative thoughts, your brain will look for more and more and more reasons to support why you should have that negative thought. This morning, I was getting things ready because we were going out for breakfast. And a couple of things that I needed to do was change out the laundry and then get my dog some food. And when I went to change out the laundry, I was out of the laundry detergent, so I needed to refill the dispenser. And then when I went to fill my dog's food bowl, I realized the container of food was empty, so I needed to go refill it from the big bag that we have in the garage. In both of these situations, I was in a rush. I was trying to get everything ready quickly so that we could get going. And so I felt myself getting frustrated because things weren't just working out or being easy for me to get done. And I felt this frustration growing. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so annoying. Why is this happening? Of course, this is happening. And then when I went out to the garage, I couldn't find where the dog food was because my husband has reorganized things in the garage. When I found it, I realized it was tucked away. And so trying to pull it out, I had to pull some other things out. And I noticed these thoughts of, oh my gosh, of course this is challenging. Of course this isn't working. And I pulled it out, opened it up. Sorry if you can hear her screaming. I opened it up and then I dumped it into the container. When I was going to close it, I noticed this thought again of it's probably not going to close because this bag is a little bit finicky. I stopped myself immediately in that moment and replayed the last 5 minutes and went, wow, I have really only noticed the bad things that have happened this morning. So I am willing this bag to be hard to close because I am saying it. I am putting it out there that it is not going to close, that it is not going to work for me. So it's probably not because I'm going to look for that. My brain is going to go, oh, you don't want this to work. You want this to be more frustrating. Let's only focus on the frustrating parts of this morning. And in that moment, I said, actually, it is going to close. What I need to do is just slow down and look a little bit closer and see if I can get that, the little thing you have to line up so that you can push and zip it, or sorry, not zip it shut, but just like push it shut. As soon as I did that, I felt my body start to relax. I felt better. And then it closed. And then I took a moment to go, what have I actually focused on this morning that has caused me to feel frustrated right now, that has led to me feeling frustrated, as opposed to what are the good things that have happened this morning? My daughter only woke up once last night. And after I got her back to sleep, I was actually able to go back to sleep because a lot of the times I have a hard time getting back to sleep. Last night, got back to sleep, had a great sleep in. And by sleep in, I mean 6 o'clock. And I woke up feeling great. She woke up feeling great. She was singing. As like within 2 minutes of waking up, she was already singing. It was so cute. The sun was out, but it was like a cool, brisk morning, which is really exciting because it's been so hot here in Queensland that having any sort of weather where I can wear a jumper, although I am getting a little bit warm now, but all those things were such beautiful moments. My husband and I had 10 minutes to just wake up and talk to each other before we went and woke up our daughter. All of these things. We decided to go for breakfast. We decided to go for a walk. Such beautiful things that I could focus on instead of focusing on these little moments where things went wrong and allowing that to become the narrative for the morning and allowing myself to get frustrated. As soon as I realized and as soon as I took that step back and went, you know what, I can actually just take a moment here and chill out and let myself figure this out, I felt instantly so much better. My sympathetic nervous system switched off and I chilled out. And then the rest of the morning, guess what? It went really smooth. Maybe there were hiccups here and there, but because I was focusing on the good things, I noticed more good things. And this is what I mean by the fact that I think it really comes down to these little moments, these tiny, minuscule, like blips in our day where we have a choice of how we choose to see it. How are we going to look at it? How are we going to move through this situation? Are we going to see it as a challenge? Are we going to see it as something that needs to get done and that we can slow down and do it and take a moment, take a breath, center yourself, and then focus on something good within that moment? Because by those moments alone, you can make such a massive difference in the way that you feel and then in the way that you show up. And I'm speaking for myself specifically because I lived it this morning and I lived it the other day with the breakfast a couple of days ago. It is incredible how big of a difference it can make when you do really slow down and look at these moments and change the way that you speak in those moments. And the important part is that you don't have to do it perfectly in order for it to work and in order for it to be successful. Because in both of these examples, I didn't do it perfectly. I actually messed up. I made a mistake. I'm not going to say I said the wrong thing, although that was my inclination because I still have that black and white thinking in my brain. But I acted in a way that was not in accordance with the way that I want to be and in the way that I am moving myself in the direction of. But the difference is that when it happened, I noticed and I interrupted the pattern because I realized, hang on, that's not in agreement with the way that I see myself and the way that I speak to myself. So I need to move differently. What can I do in this moment to give myself some compassion? First of all, I think I haven't even spoken to that, but that is such an important part of this because I could have had those moments and then changed my language, but then beat myself up for the fact that I said the wrong thing. I could have said, oh my gosh, how dare I have a moment of negative self-talk when my entire mission is to speak more positively to myself and to show other women how to do that too. Definitely, I could have done that. But such a big part of this is being able to then fill that moment with some self-compassion of, actually, it makes sense why that came up because I have this story for 25 years that I need to be perfect and that I need to have everything figured out and that I need to have this appearance. I need to maintain this reputation that I am this perfect person that has it all figured out, because that was the story that was reinforced for me throughout schooling, especially because I was seen as the smart girl. I was seen as the one who was top of the class all the time. And now I am slowly but surely dismantling this belief and replacing it with a belief that it's actually okay and it is part of the process to make mistakes. You're never going to not make mistakes ever, ever. At whatever level you get to, there's going to be unlimited mistakes that you can make. And you actually want to make mistakes because that's where you get the opportunity to get the rep in. If I was just perfect all the time, it would probably mean that I wasn't actually being my authentic self. And I was probably holding myself back from saying things that I wanted to say for fear of getting it wrong. So then essentially, I would still be stuck in the old way of thinking. So in these moments, it is about being able to go, well, this happened. Now I am going to be compassionate and just realize that the thought happened. Instead of being judgmental, it's like, oh, well, that happened. That's interesting. That's probably from, this story of me growing up. And let me just run through the process of saying something different. And actually, as I just said that, I noticed that earlier in the episode, I think I actually said corrected myself. And even using that word corrected could be me being judgmental of myself, saying that I did it wrong. So interesting that this is an ongoing process. Like I said, I am learning how to let go of the judgment. I'm learning how to be more compassionate and to let myself notice the thoughts that come up with a non-judgmental mind, and then practicing a different way of speaking, a different way of thinking, a different way of programming my mind so that my subconscious is moving, like I said, that magnet is moving closer or in the direction of where I want to go. So my takeaway, my challenge for you this week is to see if you can find one tiny moment in your day where there is language that comes up in response to a mistake or a frustration, a challenge, a inconvenience, something where you can become a little bit more aware of the way that you're speaking and notice the thought. Notice it, sit with it, think about maybe where it came from, and then maybe see if instead you can replace that with something that is more positive or more affirming or more compassionate for yourself. Because, like I said, I believe that it is in these tiny moments that we actually build the foundation for being able to change our entire life in terms of how we view ourselves, the beliefs we hold about ourselves, and then how that shows up in our actions. All right, that is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any thoughts, I would love to hear from you. You can reach out to me at Hey Brooke Dawson on Instagram, or you can comment on this YouTube video. If you have any other things that you would like to talk to me about, please do. Again, I would love to hear from you and connect with you. Thank you so much for being a part of this process, this journey with me. I am eternally grateful. I am so honored to be doing this and getting to share my thoughts and my learnings with you. I hope that you have an incredible rest of your day, no matter what it is that you're doing. I am going to go spend some time with my family, and I cannot wait to see you in the next one.